I used to think a good marriage was one where you didn't make things heavy, where you kept the mood light, where you didn't start something when the day had already chewed you up. I was proud of how easy I was. If you had asked me back then, I would have said that was love. We met in a season when both of us were tired of drama. In those first months, I loved the small rituals. Coffee at the sink, his shoulder against mine, the quiet that felt like mercy. He'd come out of a loud relationship, and I'd come out of a long one that ended in exhausted quiet. When we found each other, the calm felt like mercy. Our first apartment was small, the kind where you can hear the refrigerator kick on and the floor creak in the same spots every night. We didn't have money, but we had routines. Coffee in chipped mugs, Sunday grocery lists, his hand on the small of my back in the checkout line. I remember thinking, this is what people mean when they say, home. Here's what I didn't understand. Calm can be real peace, but it can also be a truce signed in fear. When something bothered me, I'd swallow it with a smile and tell myself I was being mature. It's fine, I'd say, and I believed it because I wanted to. One of my favorite lines was, "Don't worry about it." It made me feel safe. The first time I noticed the cost was something ordinary. He forgot a dinner I'd planned for his mother. I'd even put out the nice napkins because I wanted the evening to feel like proof that I belonged. I'd cooked all afternoon, trying to make it feel warm, trying to make it feel like I belonged. When he called and said he'd agreed to help a friend move and wouldn't be home until late, my throat got tight like a fist. I stood there with the oven humming and the table set and said, "Okay, no problem." I even laughed like a woman who didn't need anything. After I hung up, I stared at the food and felt my face go hot. I could have called back. I could have said, "I'm hurt. I need you to choose us sometimes." But I didn't. I scraped the meal into containers and told his mother we'd reschedule. Then I cleaned the kitchen until it shined, as if scrubbed counters could fix what I refused to name. That night, when he came in smelling like sweat and cardboard boxes, he kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks for understanding." And I felt something inside me flinch. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't. Because I had taught him early and well that my needs were optional. It was a slow drip, 1,000 tiny swallowings, a life built on sentences I never finished. I didn't see it then, but my silence wasn't neutral. It was a choice. It chose the short-term calm over the long-term closeness, and once you get praised for being understanding, it's easy to keep paying that price, even when you're the one going hungry. When you don't speak, you start keeping score. Not the dramatic kind you can admit out loud, the quiet kind you pretend isn't happening because you'd rather be good than be honest. I told myself I was above resentment, but resentment doesn't ask for permission. It moves in politely, and then it rearranges your furniture. It began with little things, the way he'd come home and look past me toward the television, as if the day's real comfort lived behind my shoulder. The way he'd answer my stories with half laughs while scrolling on his phone, his thumb moving like a metronome while my words slowed down. The way he'd say, "In a minute," and that minute would stretch into an hour. I would sit there with words pressed against my teeth, waiting for the right moment to matter. I still didn't fight. I did something I'm almost embarrassed to admit now. I became extremely competent. I tried to win love through performance. If I couldn't ask for closeness, I would earn it through usefulness. I made the appointments, handled the bills, remembered birthdays, planned holidays, smoothed over family tensions. I turned our marriage into a well-run operation. From the outside, we looked steady. Inside, I felt like a woman living next to her husband, not with him. Sometimes I'd try a gentle hint, the kind that can be dismissed easily. "We haven't talked much lately." Or, "I miss you." He'd pull me in, give me a quick kiss, and say, I'm right here. Then he'd go back to whatever had his attention. And because he hadn't technically denied me, I felt foolish for wanting more. There's an evening I remember like a photograph. It was winter and the windows were black mirrors. He was on the couch watching a game and I was at the table folding warm towels from the dryer. I wanted him to glance over and see me, so I said lightly, "Do you ever feel like we're drifting?" He didn't even look away from the screen. "No," he said. "We're good." I nodded, like his certainty could replace my feeling. Then I went to bed early, not to punish him, but because the room felt too big, and I didn't know how to explain why. In the dark, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the muffled cheering from the living room. I remember thinking, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I just need to be less needy. The next morning, he made coffee like nothing had happened, standing at the sink the way he always did. He kissed the top of my head and asked what we should do this weekend. I smiled and answered, because I didn't know how to do anything else. By the time I noticed I was shrinking, I was already used to it. I'd answer, "How are you?" with "fine," so quickly I didn't even check if it was true. I'd watch him laugh at something on his phone and feel a flicker of jealousy, not of another woman, but of whatever could hold his attention so easily. Then I'd scold myself for feeling that. I was becoming a stranger to my own wanting. By year 10, I had become an expert at making peace with disappointment. I'd developed a whole inner language for it. He's tired. Work is stressful. This is just what marriage looks like. I could excuse anything if it meant I didn't have to ask for what I wanted. We still had good moments. That's part of why it took me so long. He wasn't a villain. We could laugh in the kitchen when a song came on. When friends visited, we looked like a couple who knew each other well. And we did. We knew habits, allergies, favorite restaurants, the right way to load the dishwasher. We just didn't know each other's inner weather anymore. With friends, he'd reach for my hand and make everyone laugh. And people would look at us like we were steady. Then we'd drive home with the radio low, and the quiet would return the moment the door closed. I didn't notice how much of my life had turned into managing his comfort until my sister said something that stung. We were shopping, and she watched me choose a set of plates on sale. "Do you even like those?" she asked. I hesitated. She stared at me and said, "When did you stop buying things for you?" I laughed it off. I made a joke. But later, driving home, her words kept tapping at my ribs. I tried to remember the last time I chose something because it thrilled me, not because it would make the house run smoother. I couldn't. The distance between us wasn't only his fault, and I need to say that clearly. I helped build it. I kept telling him, "Don't worry about it." I smiled when I should have named the hurt. I trained him to believe I could handle anything alone, and then I resented him for believing me. After a party, we were driving home. He'd been charming, the version of him I fell for. I told him I liked seeing him like that. I waited for him to say something that landed. He said, "Yeah, it was fun," and turned on the radio. Something in me snapped, but it snapped quietly. I said, "Do you even see me anymore?" My voice surprised me. It was small, but it was real. He sighed. "What are you talking about?" he said. "Why are you doing this now?" That line, "Why are you doing this now?" kept me silent for years because it made my longing sound like an interruption. I looked out the window and said, "Never mind." When we got home, he went to bed. I stood in the kitchen with my coat still on, listening to the refrigerator hum, and I realized I had been waiting for him to notice my loneliness the way you wait for a storm to pass. Passive, hoping, calling it patience. I started doing a strange thing. I'd imagine myself as someone else's wife. If I watched a couple in a store, hands brushing, heads bent together, I'd think, That's what we look like from far away. Then I'd feel the gap between the picture and the truth. The gap wasn't loud, it was a hollow space that echoed when the house got still. The marriage lesson I learned too late started as a simple truth. If you don't speak, you don't get known. People can love the version of you that never asks for anything, but that version is a shadow. Live as a shadow long enough, and you forget where the real you went. The first crack of change came from my own body. I began waking up with tightness in my chest, like I'd been holding my breath all night. During the day, I'd lose my train of thought mid-sentence. One afternoon in the grocery store, I reached for a carton of milk, and my hands started shaking. Not enough for anyone to notice, enough for me to feel afraid. I sat in my car afterward and stared at the steering wheel. I realized I had been living in low-grade panic for years. Sitting there, I finally understood what it was. I'm not anxious. I'm unheard. The panic of being needed for logistics but not for presence. The panic of carrying the emotional weather of a house alone. The panic of never knowing if asking for more would make me difficult. That evening when he asked what was wrong, I almost did it again. I almost said nothing. But something in me refused. I said, I'm not okay. He looked startled, as if I'd spoken a language he didn't know I could speak. What do you mean? He asked. I didn't turn it into a joke. I said, I feel alone in this marriage. He went quiet. Then he said, that's not fair. I'm here every day. The old panic rose, the urge to back down, the urge to say, you're right, forget it. But I stayed. I said, being in the same house isn't the same as being with me. I said, I miss you and I don't know how to reach you. He rubbed his face. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked. I wanted to shout, I've been telling you in every way except words. But I realized he wasn't a mind reader. He had learned the marriage I demonstrated, not the one I secretly wished for. I'd been handing him a script that said I was fine, and then I was angry when he believed me. That night we talked for 2 hours. Not clean, not perfect. I admitted things I was ashamed of, like how I sometimes withheld warmth to see if he'd notice. He admitted he'd assumed my calm meant contentment. He said he didn't know I was starving, and the lesson sharpened. People can't feed a hunger they can't see. You can't be chosen in the places you keep hidden. When he said, why didn't you tell me sooner? I heard the grief underneath it. He wasn't only defending himself. He was realizing he had been living beside a truth he didn't know existed. And I was realizing that I had been choosing silence so automatically, I'd almost convinced myself I didn't have a voice at all. After we stopped talking that night, I lay awake and felt the strange aftermath. Relief mixed with fear. Relief that I'd finally said it. Fear that saying it meant we'd never be able to go back to the comfortable pretending. After that first real conversation, I expected a miracle. I expected closeness, like turning on a light. Instead, what we got was awkwardness, two people trying to speak honestly after years of polite translations. It felt like learning to walk in a house where all the furniture had been rearranged. Even setting the table felt different, like the nice napkins weren't a performance anymore, just a choice. In the days that followed, he was careful with me. He asked how I was feeling, he offered to make dinner, he sent a text at lunch that said, thinking about you. It should have melted me. Instead, it made me suspicious. Not because he was faking it, but because I didn't trust that tenderness would last. I had built a life around disappointment. Hope felt like setting myself up. And then I did something I had never done. I told him that. I said, when you're sweet like this, I get scared. He looked confused. Scared of what? He asked. I said, scared it's temporary, scared I'll relax and then it'll go back. He was quiet and then he said, I didn't know you were carrying that. His voice softened. I don't want you living like that. We started bumping into the patterns that had been there all along. When I tried to talk about something deeper, he would drift toward fixing. Okay, so what do you want me to do? He'd ask, like my feelings were a broken appliance. When he felt criticized, he would shut down. And when he shut down, my old urge to smooth things over would flare. Here's the part that surprised me. I missed the old version of me sometimes. The old me who didn't risk anything. Speaking honestly made the air thick. It made dinner quieter. It forced us to look at things we'd avoided. It forced me to face the truth that I had participated in my own disappearance. One night we were actually arguing. He said, "It feels like nothing I do is enough." The old me would have retreated. Instead, I said, "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking to feel like we're on the same side." I said, "I don't want to win. I want to be close." He took a breath and said, "I don't know how to do this." It wasn't a rejection. It was honesty. A week later, one morning, he reached for my hand at the sink. Not as a habit, but as a pause. He looked at me and said, "Tell me what you need today." My first instinct was to say, "Nothing." Instead, I said, "I need you to sit with me for 10 minutes and just talk." He sat. 10 minutes turned into 20, and for the first time in years, I felt seen, not managed. I also had to face how I used understanding as armor. If I was always reasonable, always calm, then no one could accuse me of being messy. But love is messy. Real closeness asks for a person, not a performance. That meant letting my feelings show up without dressing them up in perfect sentences. The longer we tried, the clearer it became that the biggest obstacle wasn't just his habits, it was my fear of being too much. That fear had roots older than our marriage. I'd been the peacemaker as a girl, the one who could feel tension before anyone spoke. I learned early that harmony was earned by shrinking. That skill made me lovable in a certain way, and it also made me lonely. So when I began asking for more, I felt like I was breaking a rule. Even when he responded well, I'd hear a voice inside me whisper, "Don't push it, don't ruin it, be grateful." That voice sounded like virtue, but it was fear dressed up as manners. There was a weekend we planned to take a small trip, just 2 nights, a little town with antique shops and a river walk. On the first evening, we sat in a restaurant with candlelight. He told a story from work and I listened. Then I tried to share something about how lonely I'd felt. Halfway through, he glanced at his phone. Just a quick look. But it landed like a slap. I stopped talking. He didn't notice at first. Then he looked up and said, "Sorry, go on." For a second, the old me tried to take over. The old me wanted to smile and say, "It's fine." But I remembered what silence had cost me. So I said quietly, "When you look at your phone while I'm trying to tell you something important, I feel like I don't matter." He blinked. He turned the phone face down and pushed it away, like he was making room. "I didn't mean it like that," he said. "I know," I said, "but that's how it feels." He said, "I just check it out of habit." "I understand," I said, and then I added the part I would have swallowed before. "But I'm not going back to being the woman who pretends it doesn't hurt." My hands shook under the table, but I held his gaze. He exhaled and said, "Okay." The word was heavy. "I'm sorry, I want to hear you." Later, we walked by the river. The water was black and slow, reflecting street lights like scattered coins. He reached for my hand and said, "You're different lately." I braced. He said, "In a good way. You're not disappearing." I swallowed hard. I didn't realize I was doing that. He squeezed my hand. "I didn't realize I was letting you," he said. That's when it hit me. My silence hadn't just protected him from discomfort. It had protected him from growth. Comfort, unchecked, becomes carelessness. Avoidance is expensive. You pay for it with intimacy. In that moment, I wasn't trying to make him the bad guy. I was trying to make my inner world visible. That's what I hadn't done for years. I'd offered him a tidy version of me and then wondered why he couldn't reach the parts I kept hidden. On that trip, my honesty felt like stepping into the room with the lights on. There were weeks we did well and weeks we slipped back. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was asking for something he couldn't give, or if I had waited too long and worn my heart down past repair. One evening, months into our trying, he came home late without calling. Not wildly late, late enough that dinner had gone cold and the worry had started circling. When he walked in, he acted normal. He said, "Traffic?" and started talking about a coworker as if my tight face wasn't there. The old me would have swallowed it and punished him quietly with distance. The new me felt anger rise, hot and fast. I said, "I need you to call when you're going to be late." My voice was sharper than I wanted. He frowned. "I didn't think it was a big deal," he said. "I'm home." I felt the urge to turn the conversation into a trial, to list every time I'd felt unconsidered. That's what happens when you've stored pain too long. It wants to pour out all at once. I forced myself to slow down. "It is a big deal to me," I said. "When you don't call, I feel invisible. I feel like my time doesn't count. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to feel like we're partners." He looked irritated, and for a moment I thought we were going to fall into the old pattern. Then his shoulders dropped. "I didn't realize you were waiting," he said. "I should have called." That simple sentence, "I should have," loosened something in me. I didn't need grand gestures. I needed acknowledgement. I needed him to see the shape of my life, not just the functions I performed. We started making small agreements, phones down for the first 20 minutes after he got home. One night a week where we went somewhere and talked without distractions. If either of us said, "I'm feeling far," the other didn't mock it or minimize it. We treated it like a signal, not an accusation. Some mornings he'd make coffee at the sink and set my mug down beside his, then sit at the table with me while the house was still. Once I unfolded the nice napkins out of habit, and he said quietly, "You don't have to audition here." And I started practicing something that felt almost unnatural. Wanting things out loud, I said, "Hold me." Sometimes he did, sometimes he forgot. But I was no longer disappearing to keep the peace, and the hardest part was realizing my being easy had been part of my identity. I didn't know who I was without it. The first time I said no to an event I didn't have the energy for, I expected anger. He wasn't angry. He said, "Okay," and made other plans. We didn't become a fairy tale couple. We became older and more honest. Closeness wasn't a mood. It was a tension. On purpose, I'd go quiet out of habit. I'd retreat to the kitchen and clatter dishes like noise could replace truth. But sometimes he would follow me and say, "Don't go away on me." And hearing that, I would turn back, scared, learning, but no longer pretending that distance was the same thing as peace. The marriage lesson I learned too late is simple to say and harder to live. Silence doesn't keep love safe. It keeps love shallow. I used to believe that if I avoided conflict, I was choosing kindness. I see now that I was choosing comfort, sometimes his, sometimes mine, and calling it virtue. I think about the younger version of me often, the woman setting the table with the nice napkins, laughing into the phone while her throat tightened, the woman cleaning the kitchen like cleanliness could erase hurt. She wasn't weak. She was scared. She wanted the marriage to work so badly that she tried to make herself smaller than her own needs. The last time I caught myself reaching for "it's fine" was recent. He had made a comment, small, careless, about how I was sensitive lately. It could have slid right past me the way it used to. I felt the old heat rise, the old urge to retreat and punish with coldness. Instead, I said, "When you call me sensitive, it makes me feel like my feelings are a problem." I said it calmly, and I watched him pause. He looked at me for a long second, then he said, "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "I don't want you thinking that." He reached for my hand. "I'm glad you're telling me." Then he turned the phone face down on the counter, like a small pledge. That is what I didn't understand for so long. Telling the truth can be an act of love, not the dramatic truth thrown like a weapon, but the steady truth offered like a key. It opens doors that stay locked when you keep everything inside. We still have distance sometimes. We're human. We get tired, we slip. But now, when I feel us drifting, I don't wait until loneliness turns into bitterness. I name it while it's still soft enough to shape. I say, "I miss you." I say, "Come back to me." And he knows what I mean because I stopped speaking in hints and started speaking in language. The saddest part is how long it took me to learn the lesson. The hopeful part is that I learned it at all. I learned it while we were still in the same house, before our story became only logistics and photographs. I learned it late, but late isn't the same as never. Now when I set the table, I don't do it to prove I belong. I do it because it's our life and I am in it. Fully, out loud, present. If something hurts, I don't fold it into the laundry anymore. I say it while we're standing at the sink making coffee, or while we're folding napkins, or before the silence hardens. I put it on the table like a real thing, and I let it be seen. I don't romanticize the years I lost, but I also don't hate myself for them. I understand her now, the younger me, better than I did when I was living as her. She thought love meant staying agreeable. She thought endurance was character. She didn't know that love can survive hard conversations and that it often can't survive a lifetime of unsaid truth.